Hello and welcome back to the second part of our CSS table tutorial, where we are going to be styling up a slightly more modern table. Now, in the last part we looked at some of the basics, how to select different parts of our table, which was relatively boring. But in this part we're going to look at styling a table so it looks a lot nicer than the default, but it's something that's that could be usable on our site as well. It's not going to be entirely flashy, but it's going to be a step in the right direction to looking a lot nicer than the default, and certainly the one that we did in the first part of the tutorial. So as you've seen, or as you can see, I have created a different table from the one I used in the first part of the tutorial. The markup isn't too complicated at all. All we've got is the same header, but we've got username, location and age, and as I scroll down, all I've done is I've got lots of different rows with lots of different cells inside. So I've essentially just created a table that looks like this. Not hard at all. If you're styling tables, you obviously I'd assume you know how to create them, and this isn't complicated stuff at all. So as long as you understand this, then we can go forward and actually start to style this up. So we're going to make it look a bit nicer than it is already. At the moment it looks a bit plain. We've got this misalignment of the username here. You can see it's slightly indented, which doesn't look great. And obviously everything's a bit bunched together and looking a bit horrible. No easy way to read through the rows, particularly if you had lots of different headers. So we'll go ahead and sort this all out. So over to our primary.css style sheet. The first thing I want to go ahead and do is I want to style this table to collapse all of the borders. Okay, so I don't want any borders visible on the table. Again, we could be using a particular class for this table, but for the sake of simplicity, we're going to style all tables on our page with the styles that we're applying here. So I'm going to say border collapse. That will just get rid of all of the gaps between the borders. You'll see that that's shrunk slightly. If we were, creating, borders anywhere on the table, it would interfere and it wouldn't look great. We learned that from the first part of the tutorial. Okay, so now I want to go ahead and I want to style every single row of the table, and that includes the row in the header as well. And I want to put a thin light grey border on the bottom of every row of the table. So we'll have a border under here, under here, under here, and so on and so forth for every record that we add. So I'm going to just say table tr. So in the last part we looked at more granular selection and selecting things within the table, but here we're just selecting any tr within the table, whether it's a header, a footer, a content, like in the main body. So I'm going to say border bottom 1 pixel, solid, and CCC, which is like a light grey colour. So let's go ahead and preview that. You can now see that we have a border at the bottom of every row of our table. If we go and inspect that, you can see we've got a row here, and inside of our body we've got a row here, 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 and here. So we've got a border at the bottom of every row. It's already starting to look a lot easier to read, a lot easier to distinguish the data between the different rows. But let's go ahead and take things a step further. Now the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this annoying indent on the start of the table. So I'm essentially going to style the header to have a text align of left. So all I'm going to do is say table th, table header, and I'm going to say text align left. Now you notice that inside of our style sheet we've got this vertical align inherit, which I have absolutely no idea about, but you can see that by left aligning all of the header, that's pretty much solved the problem. We can go ahead and we can do this for all, say, all TDs and THs, but we don't need to do this as the default is left anyway. Well, what do we want to do now? We want to give it some padding, so we're going to go ahead and pad out each of the cells. So we need to pad out the header cells, and we need to pad out the main body cells as well. But all we need to do to achieve this is table th, and then we comma, so we're also padding TDs as well. And within this selector we can say padding, we'll give it a padding of 10 pixels. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a north and south padding of 5 pixels and an east and west padding of 10 pixels. The reason I'm going to do this is just going to keep the data on the left and the right a bit more separated. You'll see that if we were to just give it all a padding of 5 pixels, it looks very slightly squashed. So if we give it an east and west slightly larger, it sort of spaces everything out a bit nicer. Okay, so we're not going to do much else to this. It's already looking better than the first example and certainly a lot better than the default. But now we're going to use a pseudo selector, a more advanced CSS selector, to select every odd row of our body data, and then we're going to set a different background. So essentially the look that we want to achieve is we want this to be highlighted, this first row to be highlighted, this third row to be highlighted, and then any subsequent rows after that, any odd row. Now you might be thinking, well, how can we do this? Now traditionally, let me just give you a bit of a background. Traditionally, we would apply a class either on, some kind of server-side processing of, say, odd. So we would say class odd, and within CSS we would say table.odd or table tr.odd background hash ccc. And what this would do is this would set any row with the class of odd to that background. We achieve the effect that we want. We're going to be using DDD actually, so it's slightly lighter. We have the effect that we want, however, we have a couple of problems. One main problem is that we're adding unnecessary markup to our page to achieve effect that we can now achieve using CSS alone. So I'm going to remove these classes. We don't need to select these classes for TRs. The other downside, by the way, is that you have to use server-side processing to process whether or not the table row, when you're, say, grabbing data from a database table, you'd have to process whether it was odd or even. So, there's very slight downfalls, but they are significant. Now, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to say table tbody. So remember, we don't want to include the head. Remember, the head still has a tr. We want to say table tbody tr. So any rows within the body, let's just refresh. That's highlighted them all as I've refreshed because we're setting the background DDD. However, we can use the pseudo selector nth child. Now, nth child will select either. I'm not going to go into this because that's not what the tutorial is about. We could say nth child 1, for example. And what this would do is it's one indexed, which means that the count of it starts at 1. So this is the first row. The second row, if we were to use 2, would highlight the second row, and so on and so forth. I'm sure you get the idea. But we can actually pass the odd or even keyword into this. So I could say odd, for example, and what this would do is this would highlight every odd row. So you can now see that we've achieved the same effect that we did before, but without having to add a class to each row. So we've now got the first, so obviously 1 is an odd number, 2 is an even number, and it hasn't had the background applied, 3 is an odd number. And the beauty of doing it this way is that when you need to go ahead and say, if I was to copy and paste, let's just get that right, all of this again, so I've essentially duplicated all the content, you'll notice that the styling continues. So, if you were rendering this, or say, taking this data from a database, outputting it with a web development server process language, you could apply classes, or you could just use the CSS version, which is obviously what this series is about. So that's a really good way of doing that. Of course, you can also pass in the even keyword, depending on just how you wanted to display this. It doesn't really matter, but you could go ahead and pass that in as well. So that's essentially it. That's a slightly more modern, it's clean, it's easy to read. The headers are still by default bold if we look at our user agent style sheet, but that's absolutely fine. What I recommend is you go and play around with tables. They're actually a really good thing to style up because everything's aligned for you already, and all you need to do is focus on the styling of the cells, the rows, the header. Try and go ahead and add a foot in, anything like that. So we've styled up a table. We've made it look fairly clean and nice looking, but like I said, go ahead and play around with them, and remember that tables are for tabulated data and not layouts.